In the world of many internal and external voices, the voice you listen to is the voice that dictates your life. Would you like to discover a clear path to a life of freedom and fulfillment? Then welcome to All About the Voice podcast, where we focus on awareness, alignment, and action in order to live a life of abundance. I am your host, Victoria Rader. It wasn't your life to take was a message Kim Levings received from God upon her second unsuccessful attempt to take her life. There's a better way to live. I'll show you, and you will show others. Now, for over 3 decades, Kim Levings, the CEO and founder of ReThink You Consulting, has been a voice for better life. She helps her clients to remap their thinking to live a life of significance. Here is Kim. All right, and here I am with Kim Levings. Kim, welcome to All About the Voice.
Thank you so much, Victoria. It's such a pleasure to be here today.
You know, you guys, I was spoiled enough to be interviewed by Kim on her amazing ReThink You podcast. So even from the get-go, I want you to make sure you check it out, because just being interviewed by Kim made me rethink myself quite a bit. So tell me about this rethink thing.
Right. Oh, my goodness. Well, it depends how long a story you want. You know, if I go right back to the beginning of the story, but the ReThink You brand is about helping people rethink themselves. And that's what I do. I call myself a thinking coach. RethinkYou.com is my website. I help people rethink themselves, because so many times in life we try to change the external circumstances when in fact you are the common denominator of your life. And if something's not working, the change starts within you. And how do you do that? So that, you know, it's sort of rooted in my own story, listening to the call of God in my life, but also becoming the best I could be at who He created me to be is really at the root of my mission. And I help other people do the same.
Oh, it's beautiful. So what is your story, Kim? How did that voice find you?
Right. Yeah, the voice definitely found me. And, you know, so many times you run and hide and you don't want to listen to that voice. But I had a really happy childhood. I grew up in Johannesburg, South Africa. That's my accent. And I had a wonderful childhood. I was the youngest of 3 girls, and we were, you know, typical middle-class family, hardworking, but lots of laughter, lots of fun, lots of love. And unfortunately, that whole world came crashing around me when I was 18, and my parents got divorced after 25 years of marriage. And I realized now at the time that it was very traumatic for me, that it was very emotional, and I didn't deal with it well. I didn't realize I had to deal with it. You know, you just get on with life. And for the next 7 years or 8 years, I spent my life running away from that emotional pain and living a disastrous personal life. So even though I'd grown up in the church and I'd had a Christian foundation, as I said, I didn't slide off the altar. I jumped off the altar. I sort of ran in the opposite direction because I felt that life was unfair and this should never have happened. Long story short, I tried once and then a second time to take my own life when I had really hit rock bottom in terms of hopelessness. And the second time when I woke up in the hospital, it was the first time I heard God's voice. And He said to me, it wasn't your life to take, first of all, but that wasn't what He said to me, but that's what I realize now. And I said, there has to be a better way to live. And He said, there is, and I'm going to show you what that is. And I want you to show others. And that's where the vision was born. But again, I say to people, just because He spoke to me then doesn't mean to say that I immediately went on and lived this amazing life, because I wasn't sure what to do with that vision. And I went right back to my familiar. I went right back to working hard. I always had a great job. I went right back to working hard and playing hard and doing everything wrong. Ultimately got myself pregnant. And that was the second time God spoke to me. And the pastor who spoke to me when I was pregnant, I was devastated. This is in the mid-'80s when, you know, being an unmarried mother was not acceptable. And he said to me that day, he said, you know, you so desperately wanted something to love. And he said, you tried to take your own life and God has given you one in return. Oh. And that switch flipped in me. And I'm like, you know, I have to do something with that vision. I have to make something of my life for the sake of this child, because what a gift of grace. So that's some of the original story on how I started. And, it's been a long journey ever since then on helping rebuild my own life and using the tools and resources that I still teach to this day on how to rethink yourself.
Yeah, what an impactful story. I think especially in the light of most recent events, we know that while we're counting those lives lost with COVID, the number of lives lost that are being taken is climbing up
Yes.
from that overwhelm, from feeling of being stuck, right? From being stuck. A while back, as a cry of hope, not cry for help, cry of hope, I've recorded this little video that was called Taking Your Life to Live It. Because thinking of the language, I think, and having gone through that it is probably when you feel that the only control you have left in your life is to take it, because everything else around is hopeless and you feel so stuck. So in that moment, how does a person get themselves unstuck?
Well, it's very difficult in that moment because there's so many steps that get you into that mess to start with. It's a case of not going down that path. But I think it's coming to grips with who you are and recognizing that everybody is created with a sense of purpose. And I often say to folks, you are not an accident. You are divinely created to fulfill a purpose that only you can fulfill. And just recently, and I know that you don't even know this, Victoria, and I'll speak more to this, but I feel just in the last 3 months that I have a more significant call in my life right now to address mental wellness in the church, saying that the church at large is not doing a good job of dealing with mental wellness. And God is calling me into that work, and He is speaking into my life on a daily basis right now, just in terms of what that means. And I recognize that this whole journey, which is 30-something years of work in training and coaching and doing so many things, was all preparing me for what's coming, for what the next mission is. But to your point, it's listening, and it's just knowing that I often say that, each of us is like contributing an instrument to the orchestra of the universe. And without you playing your instrument the way God designed you to play it, the music's just not the same. There's a vacuum, and understanding that and hearing His voice and knowing how He speaks over you is just so critical to keeping yourself away from the hopelessness. Because hopelessness is when the voice and the light's gone out and you're looking within. And, if you look within yourself for your strength and for your source, it's never going to come because it's within you. And that's only going to get you deeper into a place of hopelessness, because you do not have the ability to do what you need to do in life. You can't do it alone.
Well, why do you believe, what are the main reasons that people get stuck in those, what you call mind ruts, and then they stay there in that hopelessness and that, why do we stay there? We've all done it.
Oh, we've all done it, and we have these mind ruts. It's how the brain works. So as you know, Victoria, I love to study the brain, and I look a lot. I use neuroscientific methods to my coaching. And at the same time, the voice within yourself becomes very repetitive when you get stuck in those ruts. And it is possible to expose the lies and reprogram it and remap those parts of the brain. And obviously, you need help with that. Most times, though, the very first step I give people is just start thinking about your thinking. Think about what you're thinking about.
I love it. Yes, I call it notice what you notice. Same powerful concept.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Notice what you notice. What are you thinking about? Where are you putting your focus? And what language are you using? What is the voice that you use when you speak to yourself? Is it kind, loving, creative, full of possibility? Or is it full of judgment and disregard and negativity and self-deprecation?
Yeah, I think
we all have a choice of those two voices within us.
Oh, I love it. I think Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you think you cannot, you're right. I love that. You cannot argue against someone's story. And how have you shifted? I want to hear your two stories. That first story that led you to considering and attempting to take your life.
end the story of this beautiful soul now, what were the two thought patterns that
Very good.
for us to look at?
Great question, Victoria. I'd have to think back. It's, as I said to somebody, when you've been recovered for a long time, it's hard to put yourself back in that. And I think that at the time, though, as I said, I didn't recognize the trauma of the divorce. I didn't realize the actual grief that's associated with that a significant part of my life had collapsed. And when that happened, I think that, we get things convoluted. Our brain has to make sense of events that are happening around us. So what the brain does is that, it's got to make sense of it, and then it stores these patterns or these thoughts or beliefs. And I started to believe that I was less than. It was because I lost my footing. I started doubting myself. That was the same year I failed university. And I thought, well, I'll never be good at this. And I started the I'm not good enough chorus in my head. And I don't know how else to describe it. I just kind of almost went out to find things to prove my theory that I wasn't good enough. And looking for love in all the wrong places. I think there may be a song called that somewhere along the line, but that was my life. And it was true. I had lost this foundation of love and support in the home. And I felt like I'd lost it. I mean, it was replaced by other things. But in those few years, I felt like I'd lost it. And I would go looking for love in all the wrong places. And because I wasn't feeling good about myself, I was attracting the worst kind of people into my life. So people that came into my life were the people who would hurt me and disappoint me and make me feel even more degraded and more shameful. And so this pattern of shame and self-deprecation gets deeper and deeper and really is at the root of the depression, where you start to believe these lies about yourself. And I think it got to the point that it's like, I don't know what the answer is, and I need to just remove myself from this situation because I'm just not good enough. And I cannot remember what those final thoughts were. You're in such a state of hopelessness when that happens. For anybody to try and attempt to take their life, it's very hard to put yourself back in that place because it's such a place of despair. So that's the one story.
Before you continue with the second one, what I want to intercede with is very powerful observation, because that emotion that if you identified as the last pattern of emotion was shame. And I know David Hawkins has done such amazing research on the frequency of human emotion. And what he has done is he's wired people's brains, and when they experience some emotion, it was measured. And so with flatline being death, 0, shame was when the brain vibrates at about 20. And then above shame, just a little bit higher, is guilt. And then there is apathy, and then there is anger and pride, and only then willingness, courage, neutrality, and so forth. And so I think being in that place of shame, and when you're tired of feeling guilty, the only possible outcome your brain seeks is the way out of shame.
Yeah, the way out of shame. And it's very true, because you are vibrating at a much lower level. And so, yeah, that's absolutely what was going on, Victoria. But, the second story where I am right now, it's taken a while to get there. I often say to people who I coach and people I take through my training, it's taken a lifetime to get these patterns established in your brain. It's not going to go away overnight. It is possible to change the narrative, and it's possible to craft a new story and write a new verse of your song. And be patient and be kind to yourself. So, yes, it starts with that. Pay attention to what you're paying attention to. Think about it. To some degree, affirmations. But, there's been some new studies around affirmations that I want to address in a couple of minutes. But it's coming up with that positive self-talk and starting to see all the things that are right with your life, starting to count your blessings, starting to develop an attitude of gratitude, and daily focusing on being grateful for things. And I was fortunate because I was given this precious, perfect baby girl. And, it just consumed my life for those few years. So it made it easy for me to put myself back together. I still ended up marrying the wrong man and making some decisions that backfired on me. But that said, during that time, I was a corporate trainer. I was the head of a training department. I was doing training and leadership coaching, etc. That was my field. That's my profession. And I realized one day, and again, it's this voice. It's like, I think that God spoke to me. I can't remember now. It was so long ago, more than 30 years ago. But I remember him saying, I've given you all these tools and all these resources, and now you've got this problem that you're solving for yourself. Why don't you apply what you already know? So I often say to folks when I coach them, look at what's already in your toolbox. Don't search for the things you don't have. Focus on what you do have. And I realized I had all these skills, and I'm like, why don't I apply the skills to myself? And one of the first tools I developed is actually now morphed into what I call a stress diagnostic tool. It's something that's on my website. And I said to folks, this goes right back to the early days in the early 90s, which is when we emigrated. It was around that time I had started to write this material. And my first program that I put out there was called The Third Alternative. And I did a speaking tour in South Africa and did some retreats and workshops in Los Angeles, which is where we were living. But the stress diagnostic was really, it's the diagnostic of saying, what are all the roles and relationships in your life, and what are the expectations that come with them? What do you do in all your waking hours? And when you look at everything that you do, how often do you do it, and what do you feel about it? It's like, so both action and emotion. So I developed this analysis tool saying action and emotion. When you map those two, you end up with a stress diagnostic. And, as we know, you get good stress and negative stress. But people who tended towards victimhood and self-deprecation were people who were trapped with more than 50% of their time in what I called the red zone of their stress graph. That means that they were either doing a lot of things that they really didn't like doing. So they were doing them out of obligation and resentment. Or they were not doing enough of the things that they really loved to do. So there wasn't enough counterbalance. So that was the beginning of the tools. And then I helped, I have a color wheel of personality, and then I help people assess and diagnose all 4 parts of self. And so it sort of grew from there. And it was called The Third Alternative because in those days, there was still this argument between, it was aimed at women because there was still this argument about whether you were a stay-at-home mom or a career woman who had her child in daycare. They would attack each other saying, you need to stay home with your kids. And others would say, no, you need to have a career of your own. And I said, the third alternative is to do what's right for you, to do what you're called to do. And
I can only applaud that. I can applaud the third alternative.
Right. So that was the beginning of it. And that's what's morphed into what's now ReThink You. It got retitled in 2014, I think it was, 2013, 2014. Mm-hmm. I went through a massive kind of crisis redirect in my life. And after having ignored this process for a while and taken a job and done other things, I kind of pulled it back off the shelf and repackaged it and thought, I want to get back to this because this is my true passion. And that's when I reshaped it into ReThink You. And that the ReThink You brand was born in 2015.
Yeah, well, happy, what is it now? 6-year birthday.
6 years, right?
Well, they say 7-year cycle is when the seeds take in and start germinating. So, you know, that's kind of the beautiful thing. I want to touch on 2 of these. So much and powerful information here, really. But I want to touch on 2 things. One is this concept of the third alternative. I think it is so profoundly powerful because our mind thinks in polarity. And it's retraining your mind. You know, I have a lot of actually clients that come in with an ultimate diagnosis with cancer. And then they have 2 alternatives. I kill cancer or cancer kills me. And the very first alternative I introduce is, how about you live with cancer? How about you live without pain, with fulfillment, and maybe you can do it for 20 more years. People live with poor eyesight and people live with blood pressure, right? So what is, but I love that you take it a step deeper saying the third alternative is always what's right for you. How does one find what's right for them? Kim, I find so many people are stuck into this. They want it, they get it, but they don't know what's right for them. How do you help them?
They don't know where to start. You know, I say if you want to know what your future looks like, take a good hard look at your past and your present. So much of what I do in ReThink You is to help people go through life mapping and examining, looking at the highs and lows and looking for what I call the fingerprints of God on their lives. I said, you know, you've got to be a good detective. And somebody said something to me recently, I continue to learn, which is also one of my principles. You know, you're never done. Be a continuous learner. And someone shared with me recently how I tend to kind of dismiss some of these career chapters of my life saying, well, I went and I took a job because I was a single mom after my divorce, and I would take jobs because they would pay the bills, and I would sort of give up on the business, or at least put the business aside. And she said to me, those were not wasted chapters. God brought you into work that you needed to go and learn something from each of these jobs. You learned something that's now preparing you for the next chapter. So the reframing and being a good detective of looking at the chapters of your life, what were the highs and lows? What did you learn from them? What were the trends? Too many people get stuck at, well, I need to figure out what my purpose is. I said, if your purpose is not immediately relevant, immediately apparent rather, it's pretty pointless trying to get stuck there and spin your wheels trying to figure out your purpose. It's like, choose something and go do it. Because if in the process of doing it, you think, oh, I don't want to be doing this, well, good. We figured out what you don't want to do. And sometimes you have to go through that a few times and then your true purpose emerges. But most times, God's fingerprints will show you how he's equipped you, how he's wired you, where he's calling you to.
That's just gold. That is just gold. Choose something and go do it, And I tell people, because our brains are wired to hear no very loud, right? As a kid, you reached out for the stove, you heard no. But when you were playing with blocks, nobody said yes, 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 yes. So our brain is wired to hear no. So I just make a suggestion, pray and say, hey, this is where I'm going. And if this is not aligned with your path for me, redirect me. All day long, redirect me. But God can't direct your steps if you're not moving your feet. So.
Absolutely. You have to be in motion. There's a quote in Isaiah that says he heard a voice behind him. And it's like, yeah, he heard the voice behind him because he was already in motion. You have to actually be in motion in order to hear the voice. But also, I think we've got to recognize, Victoria, that we have free will. So God can engineer things, but at the end of the day, it's up to us. And
so how do you define free will? How do you define free will and how do you apply it? How are we to apply it?
All right. Well, we're going deep now. I think it's free will because we have free will. That's how we got the mess that we're in anyway. We can blame Adam and Eve, whoever they were. But we have free will. And for that reason, God will not physically interfere in our life. He influences us through spirit. And he uses the spirit to direct us via our own thoughts and our own emotions and kind of what we choose to do. So it's almost like he's directing, but he's not physically interfering. At the end of the day, if you're going to make a stupid choice, okay, go do what you think you should do. And then afterwards, when you've fallen and bumped your head, maybe a spirit will whisper in your ear that probably wasn't a good idea.
That's right. God can't do for you what you won't let him do through you.
Right. Right. He works through us and we have to be willing to listen. And just a great thing that I'm also learning right now, because I've always been a planner and an organizer and a goal setter. And I'm being challenged right now in this book study that I'm doing to become less structured and be willing to go with the flow, be willing for God to disrupt or for things to be disrupted because there's something for me to see. So it's maintaining that flex. But to your point, if somebody's not quite sure where to start, they start with think about your thinking. And then I do what I call the do versus don't exercise, all the things that you're not happy with in life. We're wonderful at complaining and whining. So start there. Write down all the things that you tend to complain about. And look at them as the things that you don't want out of life. And then on the other side of the page, write what you do want. Write the complete opposite of that. And start defining what you want in life. Because if you don't know what you want, then you're just drifting. Oh. And to drift means you're going to miss it. You're just going to miss it somehow.
My dad and I just walked my dogs. I have 3 dogs. We walked literally a day or 2 ago, and he told me this joke that I think is so powerful to summarize that point. He said, this guy is standing on the subway, and he's standing there thinking, man, my life sucks. My wife doesn't understand me. My job is horrible. My boss doesn't get me. And he just keeps on going on, as you said, just complaining and complaining. Meanwhile, there is an angel standing right behind him with a pen, writing down and saying, these are such strange wishes, but ask and you shall receive. And so I just I love that because, we're asking that concept, ask and you shall receive. We're asking with our thinking.
Exactly. It's what are you putting out there? What you focus on, you will get more of. And as I say to folks, it's a bit like big data, Victoria. You know, people complain about Facebook and Google using big data and, you know, the sort of online intelligence that when you're looking to buy a piece of furniture and then hours later you're on a completely different website, you see ads for that piece of furniture. That's called big data. And I said, our brains are massive data processing machines. And the more you think about, the more you will get of that in your life. Mm-hmm. So if you're always focused on what you don't want and what you don't have and what you can't do, guess what? You're going to get more of the same. Just like on Facebook, if you click like, comment, share on something that you don't really like, or is stuff that you don't like, you're just going to get more of it because Facebook thinks you want more of it because you keep clicking on it. Our brains work exactly the same way. As you said, and ask and you shall receive. We don't ask. And why? Why don't we ask? At the root of it is because we don't believe that we are worthy.
Ah, so true. So
People
true.
hold back on themselves. Yeah.
With that sense of worthiness, and what I've noticed so powerfully that you've mentioned, while your company is so beautifully called ReThink You, every time you've talked about thought patterns, you've brought emotions. And, you know, I just think and now you're divinely guided to be working with people that are dealing with mental challenges where often the thinking is scrambled to different parts, yet they are children of God that deserve the same peace. And I think, you know, there was this book that I love reading by James Allen, and the name of the book was As a Man Thinketh. Powerful book, you know, but it has done, I think, some disservice to us because he didn't finish the quote. Because the quote that he took so wisely from Solomon is not as a man thinketh, so is he. It is as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he.
Yes.
You know, so how do you connect these two? Because through this whole interview, it's been thought and emotion. How do you work with those two together?
Well, they go together in that, you know, and there's two arguments. So it depends on what I'm teaching and which drawing I'm using. Sometimes I say, you know, thought drives emotion or emotion drives thought. And depending which book you're reading, you'll see it coming. But because I think they come together.
Third alternative.
Right? They come together. It's soul and spirit. But I think that emotions are the expression at the deep level because emotions come out of our limbic brain and those deeper recesses of our brains, whereas our thoughts can either be subconscious or cognitive conscious thought that's been moved into the subconscious. But a lot of that is that core regulatory networks. It's those stored patterns in our brain. That's thought. Emotions goes to the heart. It goes much deeper. So I often say to people, the best example of understanding fear and emotion and how the different parts of your brain work is you hear a sound during the night and you wake up. And in that moment, you're afraid. And you're like, oh, there's somebody in the house. That's your emotional brain. That's the deep part of your brain. Like, I have to protect myself. I have to get out. So in that split second, that fear is there's somebody in the house. Then the thinking brain takes over and says, wait a minute. No, remember, you let the dog in. That's just the dog. Now the thinking brain has sort of come in saying, calm down, everybody. There's nobody in the house. It was just the dog coming back up the stairs. And you think, oh, okay, I know what it is. That's exactly how we go through life. So many times you will feel the emotion that split second before the thought kicks in.
Love it.
We feel afraid. And the reason that happens is that it's triggering something that's stored in the subconscious brain that you're not aware of. So, you know, you get angry at somebody, and in that split second that you get angry, you're like, why did I have that reaction? Because your brain has a pattern stored that person just said or did something the way your stepfather did right before he was ready to hit you when you were a child. And that pattern is stored. That emotion is triggered. And then the conscious brain takes over and says, wait a minute, this person is not my stepfather. If you have the emotional resilience to untangle that. But people who suffer from unresolved trauma and ongoing issues can't resolve that. They stay in that state of panic.
And that's what keeps them stuck. Absolutely. Very, very profound analysis. And so I know that for you guys, if you want to pick more on this brilliant and deep and heartfelt wisdom, Kim has 2 free ebooks for you on her site. Her site is going to be in the link. But Kim, what are the 2 books?
Oh, right. Yeah. I have 2 free ebooks. The one is called How to Live a Life That Matters. It's basically developing a meaningful life. And the other one is 3 reasons why you are not where you want to be and what to do about it. So they're both on my homepage. And, I just love teaching this. But the other thing that I forgot to mention to you, Victoria, is that I'm doing free coaching now. And many people want to just get to know me. And some people are just afraid of coaching. Like, well, I don't know if I want coaching. I don't know if I can afford coaching. Why would I need coaching? I say to folks, take coaching for a test drive. I run a free coaching call every Wednesday morning, and they can find out more, but that's on Facebook. You can look up for the ReThink You page on Facebook, and there's a link in there to the Kim's Coaching. It's a Facebook group that you have to apply to be a member, but you kind of auto-approved. I do that just so that I can keep control on who's in there for confidentiality. But yeah, every Wednesday morning I do a 1-hour Zoom call on various topics. I teach for a few minutes. I sort of bring up a topic and then we just discuss it. It's conversational. Everybody participates. They bring their questions. They help each other. It's great fun. So that's another way to get engaged with me.
You can rethink you in a free, impactful, inviting, safe way. I love that.
Yes.
Now, I finish every episode with these 3 questions. So I have these 3 questions for you. And the first question is, you here today, if you had this opportunity to go back to that young girl that was trying to take her life, what would you tell her now?
Oh, my goodness. There is just, that makes me emotional. There is so much more to life than what you're seeing right now.
Oh,
there is just so much more. Don't give up on yourself. Trying to take your life is a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Oh, what a profound, deep statement. What a profound statement. And now I'm going to forward, and I'm now inviting Kim, who has followed this vision of healing the stigma of the mental stigma in the country, in the world. And looking back 15, 20 years from now, her looking back to you here now, what would she tell you?
She would tell me to go for it and to believe in myself because God has prepared me for a time such as this.
Ah, love it. And the final question is, if our listeners had one teaching, one statement to remember you by, what would it be for them?
It's actually a statement, and it's one of my taglines, and it sounds pat, but if you think about it, it's quite deep. It's, if you don't like the landscape of your life, then you need to rethink you, because you are the common denominator. And you have the power to change the voice in your head.
How very powerful. Kim, thank you so much for being that voice for our listeners today. This was Kim Levings. Are you ready to rethink you? If so, check out some of Kim's generous offerings in the links below the episode. Her 2 free ebooks, free coaching sessions, and a webinar. This is All About the Voice podcast, and I want to hear your voice. What has been of the greatest value to you today? Share your insight and share this episode with others. All links are in the description. I also want to invite the voice of happiness into your life via our iHappy Daily and iHappy Me apps, our daily energy boosters. You can download these apps, including a free version of iHappy Me from the Apple App Store or the Google Play App Store. For the voice of daily encouragement, grow with us with our free My Tree of Life Facebook group. If you want to join us in exploring how you can live your life with more freedom, head over to youtashine.com. That is YU2SHINE.com. I can't wait to get to know you and be a part of your journey of endless possibilities. Thank you again for listening to All About the Voice. I'm Victoria Rader, and I'll see you on the next episode.